Right, welcome back to our TaskCentre demonstrations, focusing again on access dimensions. I'm Rob Cowper from Orbis Software, and we're looking at the second leg of a two-part demo where we are demonstrating a workflow around a credit limit approval, which also includes an on-stop and off-stop process. And here I am logging in as Helen Smith, responding to a customer of mine called Miller's Arms, who's been placed on hold by the task we see on the screen. Automatically place customer on credit hold where terms exceeded. The task does what it says on the tin, and basically Miller's Arms had been put on hold by that task. It might have run on a schedule or a trigger, and now Helen, if she wants to push her sales order through, will need to try and take it off stop by perhaps appealing for an increased credit limit. But that's outside of her remit to complete. She has to submit that for approval. Perhaps in this case it's a one-tier simple hierarchy, and the credit controller in this case will either accept or decline her request, take the customer off hold, and this will all be done automatically, or leave the customer on stop, as I say, automatically rolling back her increase request. So the next tasks that will run as a result of this, the second leg, are a two-part workflow, and this is very typical of how our workflows are used in TaskCentre. This could be a multi-tier purchase order approval workflow, just as much as a one-tier in this case. It could be 5 tiers based on some sort of matrix of scope and threshold. A certain type of stock for a certain type, or a certain type of customer up to a certain threshold before approvals pass up the hierarchy. So here we're focusing on a simple one-tier approval process, and let's, without further ado, show you the data we're speaking about in Access Dimensions, the venerable Benson and Farrell's training database being applied here. And we are going to refresh our customer listing and look up Miller's Arms, who, as you can see through the red stop sign, has been placed on hold with a current balance of 42,265.
She has no access, even if she tries to edit, to take that customer off stop. However, if she goes into terms, she can try and change the terms ceiling. As you can see there, is the reason why the customer's on stop is 35,000 as a limit, and already they're on 42,000 spend. So she will need to apply to this credit controller CC in terms of Access Dimensions login name, credit controller CC, but the real name is Ebenezer. And Helen will, as you can see here, she is the account manager set under the user defined field 3 for the customer, will actually try to apply for this increase by simply setting the credit limit herself. This appears a bit dangerous, but you'll see why this is entirely safe, because of the possibilities of both TaskCentre and Access Dimensions. So here we go. She's gone to 45,000. That should basically take this customer off stop if all goes well with the application. We'll save that, and as we do, we'll see that if we go to TaskCentre, TaskCentre has suddenly started firing a task. These are the steps within this particular task that have all completed, and one row has been processed. We'll come back to that in more detail, but what it will initially will be an email to the credit controller requesting this increase. If I go into my joint mailbox, it's a demonstration, so everybody's mail's in here. We have Ebenezer's mail and Holly. Well, I've called her Helen Holly through a table here. I'll edit that because HS doesn't stand for Holly Smith, it stands for Helen Smith. So forgive me, but it gives you an insight into where I've just stored the full details for the sake of this demonstration. So we can reference multiple databases, of course, in our table lookups, not just the dimensions database, which traditionally was only viewable through the Access TaskCentre Standard Edition. You would have to have bought a little bit more than that to be able to see multiple databases, which I'm in fact doing. Right, so here we are, the email to Ebenezer, copy to Holly so she knows that it's on his table, and he will find the following on his desk one morning saying that there's been an increase request from 35,000 to 45,000 for Miller Arms on stop, and an invitation to visit this workflow. Right, so here we have the form, the approval form, showing the current balance, what it was, 35,000, and what is being requested now. He can edit that himself to what he thinks it should be, but he's decided he is going to just accept that. And that's a history of other queued jobs waiting for his approval. Does accept that. We see the next leg of the approval kicking in, and obviously emails will be sent. And we see the automated mail back to Helen. Note it doesn't say Holly now. There's the name that's been corrected. So you get a little bit of insight into how we are able to dynamically change names. Originally 35,000, requested 45,000, has been approved. Kind regards, Ebenezer. All right, how did we get there? If I go into TaskCentre, if I look at the first workflow item, even before I do that, let's just address any skeptical minds that this has in fact happened. If we are to refresh our customer lookup, we will see that it's actually harder to find now that it's not on stop. Miller's Arms, there we go, is no longer on stop. The red stop sign's been taken away, flag's been turned off there, terms have been set to 45. I'm going to I'll come back and retry the other alternative path later where it might have been declined, and we'll see what happens there. But for now, let's go and see what's going on in the workflow. So in the original workflow, that triggered the processes will be Helen's request. There was a trigger in dimensions based on an increase on that field that started the whole process off. The triggers are automatically self-generating and coded by TaskCentre, which has a codeless environment ideal, and literally the trigger's being generated, the code for it. There's the code lit by a Gui, as we try and do with most things in TaskCentre. We simply had to indicate the columns we wanted chain monitored under the specific table, and the ticket that we just had to tick off various boxes here and indicate what we wanted the trigger to basically do and set the business rules around it. So when the new credit limit is assigned, Helen set it to 45. We'll there it is inserted. If anyone who knows SQL. We will store that in a variable that we've got created called new credit limit. And the reason that there's a variable is I might want to format that variable into decent numeric notation with commas for thousands, decimals, and so forth. And that there I do that with new credit limit format and new credit limit formatted from just plain new credit limit. And I'll do that a bit later on in the task. Again, other things that we wanted to map were who's the customer that was on hold and their name and so forth. Under the filter here is the interesting bit. Here we set the business rules as to how the trigger should fire. We only wanted to fire for customers that are on stop, where the credit limit, the new credit limit exceeds the old credit limit. Deleted would be the previous credit limit. And where credit limit exceeds balance. So it doesn't fire the whole time. We don't want to overwhelm our credit controller. This is the business rule for this particular process. Obviously, one can edit these and change the business rules as they apply at your company. Okay, so this code was generated and it fired because we edited. Notice that inserted and deleted notation there. Inserted means edited or inserted in SQL notation. Deleted means the previous or deleted. And so what we've done here is we have enabled a rollback to happen if required, and which would be the case if there was a decline on this request from the credit controller, so that it will roll back the number of that 45,000 that Helen entered back to 35,000. So she won't have to worry about that. Neither will the credit controller of the system will after that. After the trigger has fired, there's been this request, we go and run a couple of queries. Again, they're all sort of Gui queries, where we generate the SQL script literally by just dragging and dropping and ticking boxes, ticking predicates, and so forth to generate our code. And there's our query. And what we're doing is we are obtaining all that we need now for the correspondence and the approval. So we're getting the name of the customer, obviously, but also, just for the sake of a decent looking email, the approver's email address is, which is not stored in dimensions, stored in that separate table that we had, and maybe just, an addressee name. You don't want to say dear CC or dear HS. We want, dear Helen and dear Ebenezer. So we then might have a bit of VB script to set some variables. Here I'm reformatting certain variables just because they'll look better on paper, to put decimals in and so forth. Very basic VB script. And here we now create the workflow job. So this icon, and from our toolset, actually forms part of the workflow submissions. And it's a format tool. It works in tandem with the event that we're about to create in the next task of workflow job submissions. And it will be worth looking at because it gives you an idea of how we can set these forms up and how easy that is. So here I'm using Word as my editor for an HTML form. That's what produced that approval form for the credit controller. Just edited it in HTML. But here I've decided to use Word as my tool. And literally we could just drag and drop anything down, tick boxes for Booleans, text boxed for numbers, and could add some notes there from the credit approver as to why he's declined. But I'll just keep it simple. I'll put a field in there for the new credit limit and a few fields here that are going to simply carry through to the next task in a hidden format. So when we preview, you'll see those hidden fields have disappeared. This is roughly the format that the approver is going to receive on his email when he follows the link, as you saw, accept or decline. And these fields here, customer name, balance, and so forth, are all the variable of the credit limit formatted for thousands and so forth, are all get dynamically populated, almost like a word merge document, literally by just dragging and dropping that information from record source onto the canvas and taking it from there. You will notice, one can set the style, the font, the family, borders, margins, anything that you like on a form here. So this can become a very powerful tool for doing simple approvals, putting in numbers, putting in accept declines, submits, comments. And as I say, this form can be recycled and used in a multi-tier approval process. Right, so we're moving on from there. That has created a form, which we also now need to send an email link to that form. That's going to be created automatically on a TaskCentre portal. And the email will be, again, design exercise whereby we drag and drop various fields onto the form like a word merge. In this case, I like using variables rather than directly from the data. It's just my own personal preference because it says what they do and I can format them. But it's the same, the dynamic merging, if you like, is the point I'm trying to make here. And there is the hyperlink. That's the link that to the web portal that was sent to the administrator, and there's the signature. All right, and then finally the message gets sent off, and it gets sent off dynamically addressed again to whoever the addressees might be. So here it's the credit controller as the addressee and a copy to the requester. That was then followed up by following that link as we saw there through the email, and then this task file, which is the workflow, and the workflow initiated from a click on the submission from the portal. That was the event that fired this. It went in turn and looked up all the details for its email correspondence and managed the decision. And of course, there was a decision of an approve or a reject on that form. We pulled two buttons on to the form. One was called reject, one was called accept or decline. And we therefore have a fork to process. And in this case, we followed an approval path, and therefore we went into the Dimensions API. Here we are, by putting in the appropriate stored procedure from the API. More on this in the previous webinar, how simple this is to use and how this is dynamically populated again. We didn't type in all of these possible parameters on the left. This was pulled through automatically by the tool, so it's very easy to use. We just had to pop in the various mandatory fields that we wanted in place here. So as you can see, most of them have not even been used. It's quite simple to execute. Again, we formatted our mail for a reply and sent that information off. So that's why we had that approval coming through as an email to Helen earlier. What happens now if Helen had declined and there had been a rollback? I'll just follow this through this example and roll back the data, if you don't mind, just to show the power of the SQL behind the Access database and the possibilities that allows us. So here we have a rollback to our scenario before the whole exercise. That's been basically, this customer should be placed on stop now, and they will be if I go back and run the original task. That placed them on stop. There we go. Here comes the notification that the customer's now been placed on stop. They exceeded their limit by 500. Immediate credit hold applies. So you're seeing a bit of a rehash of the very preceding task all over again now. But now this gives you an idea of the end-to-end process. So Helen had then went into the customer terms and initiated the process. I'm trying to write up to 45. We've seen all that. We know that that's going to fire the same chain you saw earlier. And we're going to see the request to Ebenezer as before, except this time Ebenezer is going to decline. He's going to think, no, not this time, Helen. I'm happy with my 35,000 limit. I'm not even going to edit it. I'm just going to decline. And he does. The decline will have fired off the second of our tasks. And again, here it says that there will be a mail sent to Helen, but there's also going to be a bit of work done in Dimensions, which I'll show you. So what does Helen see? She sees that there's been a denial, but also a rollback. Now, how did we do the rollback? So the rollback was achieved. We'll see it by just refreshing the screen. There's the on stop still in place. And notice now that the credit limit is back to 35 from 45. And that is because of the SQL possibilities on task at the time of the trigger. So this trigger tool we use here in our toolkit under the event part of the menu. This allows us to keep the previous data in memory, which is what we've done. And we've passed that data through as a hidden field through to the next task so that the information is there and can be recycled. So that's a very powerful tool that for audit trails, if you think about that. Very important with changing bank details. We can see what things were before, who previous users were, what the changes have been. We can calculate differences, but most importantly, we have an audit trail, and I think audit is obviously a key part of credit control that you might want to see. So that gives one some ideas. In the process of the both processes, you'll see that this was a single tier hierarchy. We would have had to go and look up at a lookup table of a matrix of hierarchical criteria, probably the amount of credit limit or the type of customer, and would have routed to different addressees depending. We've seen how we looked up the email addressee details, so it would be a similar concept, if you like, that's put in a multi-tier approval process. We would have had a lookup table in some other database, not Dimensions. We create these tables outside of Dimensions, in which case you would need view access outside of just the Dimensions database, which isn't a problem, but you should just be aware of that. So hopefully that's given you some ideas of what is possible now with workflow and anything else in the accounting arena. For example, you could have a purchase order approval process kicking in here, and using these simple workflows and, again, rules around those. Very typical use of workflows. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time again, and look forward to talking to you in the next webinar, which will probably be focused on foreign currency reevaluations automatically from the Yahoo website of maybe your outstanding open POs. So one can will have an understanding of what sort of spend commitment is out there. That doesn't strictly fall under credit control, but we could still, foreign currency does have an aspect on credit control too. We could have a look at that, and you can extrapolate accordingly as to what the possibilities might be. But we will also probably be looking at now a credit safe integration, where you're now pulling down information on your customers, whereby you might want to see what their liquidation status is, their legal status, if they're in any court suits, what their parent company's status is in terms of liquidity or suits, and that would be obviously impacting your credit risk, and you could apply a credit score on that, even put a customer on stop if it's a severe score, or alternatively turning it into a marketing opportunity whereby you interrogate Credit Safe for recent capitalization data. Credit Safe holds that information and therefore allows us to see what customers have come into money. And if they've come into money, of course, that will be of some interest to another department, mainly sales. So that will be for a later webinar. That's part of this little series, and I hope you'll join me for that. Thanks very much.